everyone, Kelly here. So today I want to try something a little bit different. I'm kind of combining several different video ideas into one. One of those is a try a chapter. I really like doing these and I used to do them quite often. And I was like, oh, maybe I should do a try a chapter again, where I read the first chapter of a set of books and kind of decide what I want to continue reading, what I don't want to, and all that. But then I also had a bunch of new releases that I have out from the library that I just haven't read. I have a ton of them. And so what I thought would be fun is that I would take like a category of new releases that I have out, and that's just anything that was published this year in 2022. I would read the first chapter of them, and then from that first chapter kind of give my ranking of how I think I'm going to enjoy them. And then I'll read them, or there might be ones that I decide from that chapter I'm not even going to read, but any of the ones I finish, then I'm going to rank them again and see if reading that first chapter gave me a good idea of how my final thoughts would be. So I thought that'd be kind of fun. So I'm going to rank them after one chapter, rank them after I finish them, and see if it matches up. So this first grouping I have are all books that are revolving around mythology or retelling. So the first one I have is The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea by Axio, and this is based off of Korean mythology. And then I have Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Su Lin Tan, and this is based off of Chinese mythology. I have Electra by Jennifer Saint, and this one is Greek mythology. And I have Kake by Vaishnavi Patel. And then moving on to the retellings, and this first one I actually don't know if I would call it a retelling. This is actually like a sequel. This is Bravely by Maggie Stiefvater, and this was like a sequel to the movie Brave that Disney had her write. And so I'm kind of calling it as a retelling because it's taking those characters from that movie and then seeing what they would do later on in Merida's life. Then I have Glass Slippers by Leah Sipis, and this is a Cinderella retelling, but this one is told from a third evil stepsister, but I think she's not actually evil, so she wasn't kind of around in the original tale. And so that's Cinderella retelling. And then I have What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher, and this is a retelling of the story The House of the Fall of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe. So those are the 7 books. I will come back after I'm going to read the first chapter of all of them and come back and kind of talk about my thoughts and ranking. All right, I have read the first chapter of all the books, and this is the first day it hasn't been so incredibly humid that I can't be outside. So there is a little bit of wind. Hopefully you can hear me and the wind doesn't bother you, but I just have to be outside because finally it's nice enough. So what I did is I ranked these from my least favorite first chapter up to my favorite. So I'm going to start at the least favorite and go up. And I'm just going to give them a star rating from 1 to 5 of just that first chapter. And so I'm going to use that as a predictor, like if I give this book 2 stars now from the first chapter, is it still going to be a 2-star at the very end? Or could it somehow magically become a 5-star? You know, like I want to see how that rating and ranking changes. And I'll give you a couple reasons, but I'm not going to necessarily go through the synopsis of all of these. When I'm done with the books, I'm getting my final rating. I'll give a short synopsis, but I'm just going to kind of explain the vibes, the feelings, what I liked or didn't like. So least favorite was Bravely. The first chapter, I read a prologue and the first chapter. The prologue was very short, but the prologue kind of had that kind of almost mythological folktale kind of feeling, but not well written in my opinion. So it was introducing some gods that we were talking about, and then when we got to the first chapter, we're actually following Merida and her family. I gave this first prologue and chapter 2 stars. Like I said, I didn't really like the writing. I also didn't feel like it was very compelling. Like I've read all of these within like 2 days, and I already don't really remember what happened in that first chapter with Merida. So, when I actually go to read all these, I'm going to reread from the beginning just so I make sure I get the whole feeling. But I don't remember anything that happened other than that this didn't impress me at all, but hopefully it'll get better. But starting with 2 stars on that one. And then we're moving to the next one is Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Su Lin Tan. And this one I'm giving a rating of 3 stars. This was I think this was the longest first chapter. Yeah, it was 20 pages. So most of them were about 8 to 12 pages, and this is the longest one at 20, and I just felt like it was a very slow start. Like there wasn't really anything happening as much in the first chapter. It was very slow introduction. It wasn't very fast paced. So there was nothing like wrong with it. I liked the writing, like in terms of folktale. This had the kind of writing that I wanted from a folktale. So 3 stars, not meaning it was bad. I did like it. I did feel compelled to keep going. I think part of what is that I'm looking at how big it is and the fact that first chapter was slow and not as compelling. So it makes me like wonder if there's gonna be pacing problems in general, just because if you can't even like pull me in 20 pages of a first chapter, I'm a little worried. So that's why I'm giving it 3 stars and rating it second from the bottom. And then we're moving on to 4 stars. So the next like 5 I really enjoyed. They're all 4 and 5 stars in terms of the first chapter. So next I have Kikei, and this one was, I really enjoyed the writing. It had that kind of like mythology feel, but the only reason it's like the lowest of these 4 or 5 star ones is that I felt like it did have a bit of a slow start in the introduction of the characters. Not much happens in this first chapter, and like it wasn't as compelling. I did really like that there was already storytelling in this first chapter. Like we're introduced to our main character and her family, and we're already getting some mythology put in there, not just her story, but like her mother and her, I think it was her handmaid. I think it was her handmaid telling her myths and telling her stories. So we're already getting storytelling within a myth book. So still 4 stars, but on the lower end of the 4 stars because I'm not completely compelled, but I'm still interested and to continue to go. And then the next 4 stars was Glass Slippers. I think this was really well done. I mean, this is middle grade, so it's the only middle grade out of all these. So middle grade does have usually a faster pace because it's written for younger kids that you need to pull in right away. And so of course they're gonna pull kids in right away. This was another one where I read a prologue and a first chapter, but it wasn't that many pages. But it starts off very compelling because the very first line is, I didn't do it. I know you don't believe me. I can hardly blame you. So why do I even bother saying it? So it's like, it's telling you something's gonna happen, and we're hearing from her point of view that she didn't do it, but she doesn't blame the people are saying that she did. So like it has this like, we don't know what she did or what she's being blamed for, and that comes up a couple times in the prologue. We still don't know what the inciting incident is based off of that prologue and first chapter, but something is going to happen and she's going to get blamed for it, and we're going to hear from her point of view. And so I'm feeling very intrigued because it didn't tell me yet what's going to happen. And also because of the way she's being treated and everything, I feel like she's a very sympathetic main character. And so I'm very interested to keep going on that one. And then the rest of these were all 5-star first chapters. Like, hopefully they will be 5 stars overall, but just based on the first chapter, 5-star writing and just the way they pull me in. So next is Electra. And this one, I just really love Jennifer Saint's writing. I loved it in Ariadne, but overall Ariadne wasn't a 5-star read, but I still just loved her writing so much I want to pick up. And this one, I also read a prologue and the first chapter. Prologue was from Electra's point of view. The first chapter was Clytemnestra's point of view. This is told from 3 different women's point of view. So I already have 2 of the women's point of views and just loved it. Loved the way like everything was introduced. Like I do actually want to read a line from this one, and it's from the beginning of the first chapter, not the prologue, but just the way they introduced the family. This is based off of the House of Atreus. If you didn't know, that's like I can never say his name. Agamemnon and Menelaus. They're from the House of Atreus, and the House of Atreus has had in Greek mythology a lot of really bad things happen, and this is how she introduces the House of Atreus. The very first line of the first chapter is, "The House of Atreus carried a curse, a particularly gruesome one, even by the standards of divine torment. The history of the family was full of brutal murder, adultery, monstrous ambition, and rather more cannibalism than one would expect." And how do you not get pulled in by talking about this family and the curse of the history? And of course I know like what does happen in the myth, but I really love that this is being told from 3 women's perspectives that don't really get a perspective in the original Greek myth. They're not the focus in the original. Like Agamemnon and Menelaus get most of the like focus when you're talking about the Greek myth. So hearing from the women's point of view, I am really excited. And then next I had The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea, another 5-star first chapter. This one, I was really struggling which one to put at the top, because I almost put this one at the top because I loved it so much I wanted to keep going, and I was like, nope, I've got to read the other ones. I need to not continue this right away, but I really wanted to continue because it just completely pulled me in. The main character just was so compelling. I just want to follow her story. I want to find out what happens to her. It starts right off the bat with action. Like the whole first chapter is just action, not really introduction at all. So I'm assuming that we will go back and get some backstory or some more like behind what is happening in the first chapter. But we're just thrown right into action plot right away with no backstory. And I like that. I like it when a first chapter's action gets me compelled, and then you can feed me backstory as you go. But I don't really love it when a story begins with a lot of backstory, which I think is the reason why this one is back down at 3 stars and this one was at 5-star for the first chapter, because this is starting with the background before we get to the plot, where this one is starting with plot and then I'm assuming will feed me backstory later. So yeah, really loved the writing and the way it was so fast-paced from the beginning. And then the one at the top, which, like I said, it was really struggle to decide which one's the top, but I had to put What Moves the Dead at the very top because this one, once again, I wanted to keep reading. I've been wanting the whole time. I read this one first, and ever since I read this one, I've wanted to like come back to it every time I pull one of these other ones, and it made me read the first chapters quicker so that I could get to this one and actually finish it. And also, it made me pick up The Fall of the House of Usher again, because that's what this is a retelling of. And I had read the story like a year ago, and I was like, okay, I need to re-listen to it just so I have it fresh in my mind when I go to this one. And so it just like was so much in my mind, I had to go back and re-listen to the original. It was so atmospheric. This first one, like right off the bat, she pulls you into the atmosphere of the like fungi and this like creepy old mansion and all that, like, and the tarn, like the dark water around the you know, dilapidated house and all that stuff. So it just really pulled me in. And there's also like a conversation with a new character, like he meets a new person, and the first conversation was really compelling. I think you could tell a lot about whether you're gonna like a story where if the very first conversation is interesting and like makes you want to like see more dialogue. I think that's important when dialogue pulls you in right away. And yeah, I just loved everything about this first chapter and very excited to continue. So I'm not sure yet how I'm going to do this in terms of vlog. I might come back and talk about each one of these as I go, or wait until I've read a couple and rank them. I don't think I'll wait until I've read all of them before coming back and discussing a little bit. I'll just let you know as it goes. All right, so I'm ready to give you an update. I have read the 3 that I had ranked at the bottom. So this was the order in terms of bottom to the middle of the 7 I read the first chapter. I'd given Bravely 2 stars for its first chapter, The Daughter of the Moon Goddess 3 stars for the first chapter, and Kai K 4 stars for the first chapter. So let's see if they are staying in this order. And they are. So I still liked Kai K the best of these 3, and then Daughter of the Moon Goddess, and then Bravely last. So I'm going to go through and kind of talk about them. Were they the same star rating? And like kind of my opinions about them, and a little more about the actual book in case you're interested. So first, Bravely, the last one. So this one, you know, I given the beginning chapter, I read the prologue in the first chapter, gave it 2 stars, and it ended up being 2 stars. So my rating that I gave at the beginning turned out to be the rating I gave it at the end. And this is, like I had said at the beginning, a sequel to the movie Brave. So we are following Merida as our main character, just like in the movie, but she's older in this, and also her brothers, like in the movie, I think her brothers were toddler or like 4 or 5-year-old kind of age. It seemed like preschool age. And in this one, they're definitely young men, probably like teenage boys. And so, yeah, it's definitely an older cast. And the problems I had with this is that I didn't really feel like I connected to these characters as the characters from the movie. Like, yes, it's been several years. They would have changed. But, like, the things that I thought were good about Merida in the movie, she's one of my favorite of the Disney princesses or whatever, because I just love her like gumption and her like following what she believes. And even though she's fiery and sometimes gets it wrong, she just really follows through with her convictions and things. And in this one, she didn't feel like that Merida at all. Like, she felt very wishy-washy. It feels like she went back, like, on a lot of the stuff that was accomplished, especially stuff between her and her mom's relationship that was tackled in the movie. I felt like we just went all the way back to square one on those things, and I'm like, well, what was the point of making this a sequel to the movie if, like, you're gonna basically negate a lot of the stuff that happened? Because we do reference that, so it's definitely happening in that world, and it is referencing those incidents that happened in the movie, but like, we're not really building on it. So I was a little disappointed in the character work. I also think this was just too simple. So basically the plot in this is that Merida is confronted by these gods that I talked to you about in the prologue. Is all from like, is talking about kind of the mythology of the gods, and this is like medieval Scotland kind of fantasy world, and these gods confront Merida and basically say that her kingdom or village or whatever it's called that she lives in is destined to be destroyed unless some changes are made, that it's become stagnant, the people have become stagnant, and the traditions and things have stalled, and so change needs to happen in order for her to be able to save her kingdom. And so she's going to all these trips to like provinces around the area in order to evoke change in both herself and her family and the people and the communities and all that. And so it's very much a journey book, but I also just think it was too simple. Like, she would go to these places and I would just be like not really compelled into the like what was happening in that like province and area, and like the obstacles she's overcoming, it felt very oversimplified. This is definitely supposed to be a young adult book, but it had the simplicity of a children's novel, but without a lot of the charm that goes into a children's novel. So I just felt like all of it was too simple and resolved quickly. Like, anytime there was intense action moments, I felt like they resolved so quick that I was like, oh, you almost got me there with some tension, but no, it dissolved. So yeah, that's reasons I'm giving it 2 stars. The thing I did like, the reason it's not like a 1 star, I didn't completely DNF it, I did like this whole theme of like the cycle of life and like the balance between creation and destruction, because that was kind of the point of the gods and this whole reason to change, that like, you know, we can create new things, or new things are created, but also things have to die as part of the cycle of life, and they can change into different things, and then it becomes creation again. So I did like that whole theme, and I liked the way she did the ending of this book. Like, it's not like a perfect bow, and I liked that, but it was just too simple and wasn't really taking what is so great about the movie and expounding on that, I feel like. So that's why I got 2 stars. And then I have Daughter of the Moon Goddess, and I had read the first chapter of this, and I remember in that clip I had said that I didn't love this. I thought the writing was nice, but it was pretty slow, and I was worried about how long it was because I thought it would have pacing issues, and that was exactly my problem with this. This turned out to be 3 stars, which is what I had given the first chapter, and it was a 3 stars in terms of like, there were some moments that I really loved. Okay, so I don't think I ever told you what this is about. This is following the Daughter of the Moon Goddess, which is from Chinese mythology, and something has happened in the Moon Kingdom. I don't know if it's called, sorry, I don't know the exact terms, but she's living with her mom, the Moon Goddess, and has to leave. And then she needs to save her mom from a situation that's happening. I don't want to give away a lot. And so she goes to the Celestial Kingdom and has to go through all these like things in order to find a way to save her mother. And we learn a lot about her heritage, and there's visits to different kingdoms and all that in the immortal realm. And yeah, so the concept is really interesting, and there were moments that were so good. Like, there was these pockets of moments where I was like, oh, I'm super invested in this moment, in this place we are visiting in the immortal realm, and then it would be like, I would finally get fully invested in that scene, and then it would be done. And then it would be like this 100 pages of stuff I didn't care about, and then suddenly we'd be thrown into another situation where I'm like, this is interesting, I'm getting really into it, we're bringing in these like, you know, talk, and I don't want to give anything, I'm being very vague because a lot of stuff happens, it's a long book, a lot of things happen, I don't want to give it away, but then yeah, something would happen that I'm like, oh, this is interesting, I'm getting into this again, and then it's over. So it was like these moments of genius and moments of really great things. And I also really did like her as a character, our main character, Shingen. I really enjoyed her and her convictions. Like the whole time I felt like her character was very consistent. She was growing as a character, but she was consistent in like what she believed in and standing up for what she believed in, even if it could mean her life was at stake or her mother's life. And so I really enjoyed that. But those are the things I liked. But in between those moments of good things that kept me going in this book, were these big sections that I just did not care about. I think the thing with this was that the author was just choosing to focus on things that I was not interested in. And I think that's why some people love this. Maybe they were really invested. The main thing is the love triangle and her relationship with these two love interests. I just did not care about that part of the story at all, and it's such a huge part of this. And that was the whole thing that dragged it down for me. Anytime we were focused on that, I didn't care because I didn't feel like, even though there was so much time dedicated, I didn't feel like I was invested in either relationship. A lot of times with a love triangle, I can only get into it if I feel like it's even, like that I could see why the person likes both people. But in this one, I was like, there's a clear winner here. I don't even know why we have the other person, other than I know why it's a plot device, but it didn't really like seem like a valid choice. And then like the person that was like makes sense. I felt like we were like building the relationship, and then it went like from like just building to like suddenly we're like passionately in love and will do anything for each other. And I'm like, oh, where did this happen? I missed this like transition. And then I just couldn't get invested in their relationship. And so a lot of the stuff that happens is based off of the relationships. And so because I wasn't invested in the relationships, I just didn't really like care about a lot of the parts. So I mean, over half of this book I just didn't care about, and it was like interspersed between these moments I did care about. So that's why it's 3 stars, because there were good parts, there were things I really enjoyed, but there was a whole bunch of stuff that I didn't enjoy, and the pacing was off for me. But I get why a lot of people, this has a lot of hype, a lot of people love it, and I get it, because if you're invested in those relationships, then you would like all of it. So I get it, but yeah, it was still 3 stars for me. Same rating I gave at the beginning. And then next we have Kai K. I had given this 4 stars for its first chapter, and I ended up giving it 3 stars overall. So this is the first one that actually dropped down after reading the whole thing. And with this one, it was also a lot of it was pacing. I feel like both of these books did not need to be this long. I felt like this one, I had to really push myself to keep reading a lot of times. Like there were things I was enjoying. Obviously, I gave it 3 stars instead of 2, but like it wasn't enough to like make me want to pick it up. Like I only was like making myself pick it up because I knew I needed to finish it for this project so that I could keep reading other books. But yeah, it took me a long time to finish this. So basically this is not to say retelling, because it doesn't take place at the events of the Ramayana. It's like before and leading up into the events of the Ramayana, which is a Hindu epic. And basically this follows a young woman, Kai K. This follows a lot of her life. So she starts off as a young woman who is a princess. So she's the daughter of a king, and he, gives her away in a marriage alliance to another kingdom. And in that kingdom, she becomes the 3rd wife of that king. And the things that I did like about this, since it was 3 stars, I still liked some stuff. I really liked the development of the relationship between that family, like her husband and the 2 other wives. I think that sometimes in literature, that kind of relationship, when a man has multiple wives, can be, viewed really badly, but it happened a lot in like ancient history. And I really liked how in this one, she develops a friendship and relationship with the other wives, and their support of each other, and how when all of them have sons, they all call them son and raise them as their own. Like, yes, she has one that is biologically hers, but she's raising all of, like the sister wives' children as her own children. And I really enjoyed hearing about that relationship and seeing the strength in those bonds, and also the relationship with her husband and everything. We do have a character. She is kind of portrayed as a romantic or asexual character, but still I enjoyed the relationship she develops with her husband. And yeah, all those relationships, I really enjoyed that part of the story. I also thought there was some really great action scenes in this. She starts to learn how to defend her. Like, she comes from a kingdom that really, admires like warriorship, like being a soldier and fighting and all that, and riding horses, you know, to like ride in chariots. And so she learns all that stuff. So when she goes to the other kingdom where women don't really do that, she is able to like find her place in that and like show that women can be fighters. And so I liked that part about her. So there were some parts that I liked, but I felt this was just so slow. I just, because it's spanning so much time, I think there was, once again, times that it was focused on things I just didn't have any interest in, and probably weren't really necessarily relevant to her story and getting to the place where she is a part of the Ramayana. Like, it didn't really need to be in there necessarily, I think. Yeah. So there was just extra stuff, I think, that could have been edited out, for my enjoyment, at least. And, yeah, I think also there was some problems with some of the character choices. I think the way, because you're taking characters that already exist and you're rewriting them to show where they end up, I think there were times when they made choices that I'm like, that doesn't really align with how they are in the epic, and it didn't really make sense to me. Like, I mean, I think her motivations made sense of how she gets to where her character, what her character does, the big thing that is the like instigation basically of the Ramayana. I think that like it makes sense. But I think a lot of the choices of the people around her, and especially some people that were like villains in the original story, the choices just don't make sense to the characters that we know about if you've read the story. So yeah, I gave it 3 stars. It's in the middle for me. So yeah, those are the first 3. I will update you again when I have read a couple more. I have 4 more left, so I'll probably update you when I have 2 done, and then the last 2. All right, I have read the next 2 books. Glass Slippers, I had given 4 stars for the first, I think I did the prologue and the first chapter, and gave it 4 stars, and it ended up being 4 stars overall. And basically, this is technically a sequel. It's like in a companion series, but there are no overlapping characters or even world, so you could read this as a complete standalone. Just what she's doing in this series is that she's telling fairy tales from like a lost sibling. So the first one was like from a sister of Sleeping Beauty, and this is from the 3rd stepsister of Cinderella. So they're like just told from a different perspective, but like not related at all. And basically we're following Tirza, who was only 5 when all the events of the Cinderella fairy tale happen, like when she gets her prince and everything. So she is not sent off with her other stepsisters who were like, you know, teenagers and the same age as Cinderella and were the mean ones. Since she's only 5, the queen, Cinderella, wants to give her a chance, and so lets her stay in the castle while she banishes the stepsisters. But everybody just kind of like expects that she's gonna be evil, and so she has like been living there. I think it's been like 7 years. So she's like, what does that make her? I think she's 12. Yeah, and everybody's basically, her whole childhood has treated her like she's gonna be evil and have not been nice to her. She doesn't have any friends and all that. And so one day when Cinderella's glass slippers go missing, everybody assumes that Tirza did it. And so she's just trying to prove her innocence. And we learn a lot about the glass slippers. And what I really liked about this is she's taking, you know, since it's a big book, you know, you have to take the fairy tale and expand it. And I like how she's taking some of the elements from the Grimm's. I think it's the Grimm's version where, you know, like the stepsisters cut off parts of their feet in order to fit into the slipper when the prince is like trying it on. Sorry, my cat is hitting the tripod. Like she takes that and weaves it into the magic of the slippers and things. And I really like that. Like the slippers and the fae magic is much more developed like than it would be in a average fairy tale, since it's a longer book. And I really liked that focus on the magic and like what the magic does to the person wearing the slippers and all that. I found that really fascinating. I really like this like way of telling a story from kind of a side character who isn't really involved in the main fairy tale, but like was there, and like seeing it from a different perspective and all that. I liked all of that. What else did I want to say? And her writing is just super readable. So this is the 2nd book I've read by her, and they just read really fast. The thing that made this not 5 stars was that it's very repetitive at the beginning, because she's kept being like, I didn't do it. And it's just a lot of like her being bullied and then her like trying to defend herself but nobody believing her, and that like goes on for a very long time, over and over in like different situations, but over and over, kind of the same thing. And so I felt like that was a little too repetitive, and once we got kind of into the meat of the story, we're moving away from that a little bit as the focus and into a more developed storyline. But the first half of this is a lot of repetitive, like, I didn't do it, of course you did it, like kind of nobody believing her. So that was the thing that made it less than 5 stars. But I really did feel for our main character and how, you know, being seen as what the rest of your family is and like not really given a chance to be your own person, and then being raised that way. And so do you become that thing that everybody assumes you to be because of the way you're raised, not necessarily because of your true nature? So I really liked that kind of nature versus nurture discussion that was going on in the themes of this. So yeah, 4 stars, really enjoyed it. And then next I had Electra, and this one I had given, I think I also read the prologue in the first chapter of this one and gave it 5 stars, and this was a 5-star read. Throughout, I really, really like her writing. So this is basically kind of a retelling of Troy, like the Battle of Troy, the Iliad, but from the viewpoint of 3 different women. So like when we are talking about the epic of Troy and the Iliad, you know, we're focusing a lot on the men at the battle and the battle scenes that happen in Troy, where this is not really, like we kind of hear about those events happening, like they might discuss that this is the day that this part of the battle is happening, you know, like the Trojan horse and, you know, like these things that we recognize, but we're hearing it from the point of the women, so they aren't actually in the battle. And so I just really like this perspective of how the things that happen in war affect the women in either the town or as part of the family members. So we're following, one of the women we're following is Cassandra, who is in Troy. So she's the only one of the 3 women that is actually at Troy during the battle. She is the sister of Paris and Hector. You know, Paris is the one that starts the whole Trojan War, basically. So she's the sister, and her whole storyline was really fascinating to me, because I think that she was picked as like a spokesperson in this, as like what happens when we silence women, and kind of like that whole theme when women are silenced, but they might have an integral like information that would help, but we don't trust that, you know, that we'd rather listen to men than what the woman has to say. And then the other 2 women are Electra and Clytemnestra, and they are related to Agamemnon, who is like the leader of the Greeks during the Trojan War. And so they are back at home, so they're not actually at the war, but, you know, they're very highly affected since, you know, their husband and father is out, you know, leading this war, gone for a really long time. What happens back at home during that? And there's a lot of discussions about grief and revenge and family trauma. And that was like, you know, there's parts of this that is hard to read. I had like, you know, did a quote at the beginning, you know, of the last clip, or the clip where I'd read all the first chapters, where I talked about how this family has like a history of cannibalism and revenge and lots of bad stuff. And so like that past family trauma, we're looking at how that goes on generationally, how when a tragic event happens or when somebody in the family does something horrific, how does that translate to the next generation, and how does that like cycle keep going? And so it's like, it's hard to read a little bit because it is a real focus on the whole cycle of family trauma. But yeah, I loved it. I love her writing. I thought this was much more solid in its plot than her first book, and so like absolutely loved it. 5 stars. All right, we are finally finished with this project. So I read the last 2 books, and first was The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea by Axie O, and I had rated the first chapter as 5 stars. Really loved that it jumped right into the action. Like there wasn't like backstory. It was like we're jumping right into the sacrifice. So basically in this village, I think it's every year, they sacrifice a woman to be the sea god's bride, basically throw her into the sea and sacrifice her to keep the sea god happy and make the storms that like ravage the village calm down. And the girl who is supposed to be the sea god's bride that year is like in love with this boy from the village, and the boy's sister, she loves her brother, sees that her brother is in love with this girl that's going to be sacrificed, and so she takes that girl's place. She like hides on the boat and sacrifices herself instead of the girl that was meant to be the sea god's bride. And so then that is the first chapter, is just like following Mina, the main character, as she sneaks on this boat. She sees her brother and his love, and, you know, decides in that moment to jump into the sea. So that's that first chapter. Loved it. It was 5 stars. I didn't end up giving this book 5 stars in general because I felt like after that, there was a huge chunk in the middle that just really lost my attention. So basically where the plot goes from that first chapter is that we're following Mina. She's in the spirit realm and she's just figuring out how she's supposed to save her people and stop this like yearly sacrifice, because it's supposed to be like, the legend is that once the sea god has his one true bride, that it'll all stop. And, you know, the storms will stop coming. And so she wants to do that. She wants to save all the people, and she needs to figure out how to do that in the spirit realm. And obviously a bunch of stuff happens to like keep her from accomplishing that for a while, you know, and all that. So the plot of the book. But I don't know what it was. There was something that like, it was such an explosive beginning, loved it so much. But then once we're in the spirit realm, for a good chunk of this, I just was not interested. I had no motivation to pick it up. I just wasn't, I don't know if it was the writing, like the writing is nice. I don't know what it was. It was like not much action was happening, I guess is what it was. Like that it was not very plot driven. And so like, I just couldn't really like get invested until the end when the plot starts picking up again. So there was like a good chunk of this book where I thought I was going to DNF it, or that I thought, well, this is only going to be a 3-star. But in the last third, it did really pick back up on the plot. It got really interesting. I did end up really liking the main character and how her, like, just not necessarily her growth, but more about how her personality, sorry, I got like a flyaway that's in my face, but like her, personality really came out, and her like kind of, what did I call it? She has like, just a strong heart where she follows her heart, she follows her gut, and, you know, even if it's going to lead to danger, which we learned that from the beginning when she sacrificed herself, like, but that character trait really is shown in different ways throughout the book. And like, I just really liked her as a main character, but I was just not interested in what was happening in the book until like the last third of it. And then I got more invested, and then I really liked how it ended and everything. So it was like 5-star first chapter, 3 stars for like the majority of the book, and then the last third was back up there. Really enjoyed it. So I ended up giving it 4 stars total. So yeah, it turned out good, and I would recommend it. I did think it was, it turned out really great with the themes and everything like that. I just wasn't as like pulled along in the middle, but that's probably just me personally. I'm one of those people that has to have both character and plot driven in kind of equal amounts. And this kind of like takes a pause on the plot for a long time. And that's just a thing with me. All right. And the last book was What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher. This is a short book, so I won't give much description. I think I already said earlier that it's a retelling of The Fall of the House of Usher, the short story by Edgar Allan Poe. And we're following this main character, Easton. So Easton goes to visit their friend, Maddie, that they grew up with, because Maddie sends a letter saying that she's very ill and wants Easton to come visit. So Easton shows up in this manor house that Maddie and her brother Roderick live in. They're the ushers. Is just like really like falling down, and it's just creepy atmosphere from the get-go, and Easton's like, I'm not sure what's going on, but this place is not right. So that's all the setup you need, because I think the main thing about this book is that there's so much atmosphere in it, because it's short, so it doesn't need a lot of plot. There is definitely plot, things are happening, but it like is really about the atmosphere. I think that T. Kingfisher does a great job of kind of like pulling in that Poe feeling, like that when you read a creepy Poe story. Poe wrote a lot of different genres actually, but when you read one of the creepy Poe stories, you really feel that uncomfortableness, that like this is a creepy situation, like with The Fall of the House of Usher or The Telltale Heart. It like makes my heart beat faster, just that like feeling he created. And I think T. Kingfisher really captures that in this, the creepiness of this mansion, the gloominess of the surrounding area. There's some creepy animals in this, which I'm sure you could even tell from the cover. And the animals like freak me out. Like that's just the descriptions spot on in terms of a Poe retelling. But then what she brings to this that's different than other Poe tellings is her signature humor. So I've read a lot of T. Kingfisher books, but I haven't read any of her like full-on horror. Some of the short stories I've read were horror. This is like full like kind of longer length horror by her. I mostly read fantasy, so I wasn't sure if she would break in her humor, because she always has humor, like sarcastic, dry, silly kind of humor in her fantasy books, and I didn't know if that would come into her horror, and it did, and it doesn't seem like it would work, but it does. It just works so perfect, at least for me, because you're in this like creepy setting, this really tense situation and all this, and then like the way the humor comes in isn't like in dialogue between people, because there's no humor going on when you're talking between the different people, because it is a really tense situation. Somebody is dying under mysterious circumstances. And all the humor is all in Easton's, the main character's, inner dialogue, and just the way they are interacting with the world around them and kind of like lighting it up inside their own mind. And like it's shown as like just their personality is this kind of, you know, no nonsense, dry humor person, and that is coming out in their inner dialogue. And I love it. It breaks up the tension enough for me that it like, you know, gives you a little bit of that humor, but still like fully creepy the whole time. Ending was great, because sometimes with horror novels, you know, it's harder to end them. I thought the ending was great in this. Just the whole thing. Amazing. I give it 5 stars. From the very beginning, I was saying the first chapter, she pulled me in with the atmosphere and the descriptions and the characters. Like even in the very beginning, there was dialogue right away between the characters that I loved. That continued the entire time. I loved the characters. I loved all the dialogue. I loved the creepiness. I loved the inner dialogue with the humor. Everything. Great. I would highly recommend this. I'm definitely going to read some more of her other horror stuff. Like I said, I hadn't read her like big horror books, like her full-length horror, so I would like to read those now that I've read this one. I was just not sure, because sometimes horror isn't my go-to genre, and I have to like really trust an author not to like completely gross me out and not be like some things I just can't read. And after reading this, which does have creepy elements of course, but it's the kind of horror that I can handle and that I really like, and yeah, it was unsettling and perfect, and 5 stars. So yeah, those are all of the books. So did I learn anything from this experiment? Well, I don't know, it's hard to say, because if you look at like the order, you know, the one that I liked the least overall was the one that I had rated the first chapter the least. And I even knew reading that first chapter, I'm like, I'm not loving this. I don't know if I like this writing style, and it turned out that I wouldn't have even finished this if it wasn't for this experiment. So maybe that should tell me that if I'm just really not getting along with the first chapter at all, that I really need to just not read that book. Because there was none of these other ones where I felt this way about the first chapter. And this one, first chapter was 2 stars, ended up 2 stars. So that should tell me something, that I can tell if I'm really not going to get along with a writing style in 10 to 15 pages, that it can work. But then there's something like Daughter of the Moon Goddess, which I gave it 3 stars, right? I gave it 3 stars for the first chapter and then 3 stars overall. And yeah, that could correlate, but then at the same time, you know, like with Kaikeyi, I gave this 4 stars in the first chapter and 3 stars overall. So I think it's a little more iffy when it's like 3 or 4 stars. I think I really need to go by the feeling. When I was reading that first chapter of this, I just was not pulled along. I didn't really have any interest to pick this back up. I had to kind of make myself pick it up for this. And that should have told me something. Not that it was like a 2-star. Like this one, I just think it wasn't really well written, the first chapter. This one, it had beautiful writing, but it was just too slow for me. Like I said, I'm a plot and character equal amount. And this one did not have enough plot driving force in that first chapter, and it was a longer first chapter, and that should tell me something as well, that I really shouldn't have read this book. Not that there's anything wrong with this book, a lot of people love it, but it wasn't for me. I really had a hard time finishing it, and I think knowing that that first chapter, or even though 3 stars can go either way, I should know by the fact that if it's not going to have plot right from the beginning and it's not going to pull me along, then I'm probably not going to like it in the end. This is one of the cases where I would have, like, if I wasn't doing this experiment, I would have read more than the first chapter. I probably would have read the first, like, 3 and then DNF'd it. And that's what I need to remember in the future, that if I'm, like, a few chapters in and it hasn't picked up, because sometimes there's not a lot of plot in the first chapter of a lot of books, you know, it's getting you started. But it's one of those things I need to have to pull me through, that I need to know that if it's not going to happen in the first chapter, I should probably only give it a few more chapters and then DNF. I need to DNF more books because I don't want to be reading a bunch of 2-star, 3-star books. I want to be reading 4 and 5-star books. But then we have, like, the ones that I had given 4 stars, which were, I gave the first chapter these 4 stars. This one turned out to be only 3 stars, but I did really like the writing. So that's why it's hard to, like, kind of say. That is one that I wouldn't have DNF'd. I think sometimes you just end up with a 3-star book, and you can't help it. But then, you know, this was a 4-star first chapter. Ended up giving it 4 stars. Don't regret reading it. Enjoy it. These, I'll skip to this one, which was a 5-star beginning chapter. Ended up 4 stars. Nothing wrong with that. It's a solid 4 stars. And then these 2, I knew right away that I was going to love these. Like, just from the, I mean, this one I thought so too, but, you know, even by the 3rd chapter, I was like, no, this is not going to be a 5-star. But these, from the beginning all the way through, I knew these were going to be 5 stars. I just had that feeling, and it turned out to be that way. So I'm not saying that I fully know full conclusions from this experiment. I'm going to do this a couple more times. I've already started the next one, so it'll be coming out in the next month. So let's see, like, what, because this is all kind of fantasy genre, and the next one I'm going to be doing is speculative fiction, like horror, thriller, paranormal type thing. So we will see if, like, after doing this a couple times with different genres, if I see any recurring themes. I do think I have learned, though, that if I'm just really not getting along with the writing at all, that I should just stop. I shouldn't even, like, make myself, or, you know, I need to, like, if it's not the first chapter, I need to DNF if I'm, like, getting into 20% into a book and it's not working for me. I need to do that more. Yeah, so I had fun, though, doing this. I hope you had fun watching it and that it's not incredibly long. I did realize after doing this that 7 books was too many. So next time I'm only doing 5. So it shouldn't be as long of a video, and won't take me as long to do, because this took me almost like 2.5 months to read all these because I read other stuff in between. So the next one, I only picked 5. That'll go better. But I enjoyed this. I hope you had a good time, and I will see you next time. Bye.